Welcome back to Sudo Sergeant. All right, so what is an operating system? An operating system is a whole host or suite of software that people utilize to interface with the hardware of their computer. It starts with the base level, which is a kernel, that interacts with the firmware on the motherboard. So from the firmware on top of that, there's the kernel, and then the device drivers, and system utilities, which then goes all the way up to the application layer. The kernel acts as a translation layer between the application interface and the firmware on a motherboard. Firmware is the software that's embedded on the motherboard. It can either be a UEFI, Unified Extensible Firmware Interface, or BIOS, which is the legacy, Basic Input-Output Interface. So a driver is either a piece of code that's either part of the kernel or a module that's loaded into the kernel, or it sits alongside the kernel or next to the kernel in some way. And what the driver does is it interfaces with the firmware that's on a peripheral, for example, a printer or a video card, even things that are on the motherboard, and then it communicates that with the kernel. System services are software that's set on top of the kernel, and they manage a whole spectrum of services that might be necessary for the operating system in order for it to do its tasks. A graphical interface is different than, say, a console or a terminal or a command line in that it provides a visual aid for a user to understand what's going on inside the computer. The application layer in our operating system software stack is where programs like a web browser, an email client, or a photo editing suite, those applications would be in that layer. And they differ from our kernel or drivers in that they don't really manage our system resources. And that's all the time we have for this segment of the Sudo Sergeant. If you'd like to see more, please visit us at element14.com/TBHS.